Hi. I find myself wanting to talk about the history of childbirth since the 1970s onward to try to explain how we got to where we are now and the mistakes that we made sort of collaboratively and collectively without the intention of making mistakes all the way back in 1970 when I first gave birth, and how those unintended negative consequences have impacted your births today. But the fact is, people really aren't interested in the history. They want to know, what does a skilled birthing population look like now? And that's really an important question because we don't have one. And if we don't have one, then we don't know what it looks like to have a skilled birthing population. And what's really important to know is that there are two elements of being skilled to birth your baby. One is to accept that you have to do the activity of birthing your baby. And it doesn't matter whether you labor, have a vaginal birth, whether you labor and have an unplanned cesarean, or whether you have a non-laboring cesarean, or you try for a VBAC. The fact is that time is contained in birth. So birth starts at some time and it ends when your baby is born. And that time sequence has to be filled with something. And when women aren't skilled, and fathers or others aren't skilled to coach, they fill it with just being there. They're passive. They're not doing anything. They're not participating. And is that wrong? Well, it's wrong when what that causes is for you to feel detached, passive, out of control, overwhelmed, stressed. When women who are doing the activity of birth feel disconnected, as though this experience is surreal, and they look back on it and what happened, then that tells us that we as women aren't using skills. So what skills do we need to use? Well, the first, of course, is breathing. We have to have good breathing skills. Some famous authors will tell you, well, you breathe all the time now, you'll breathe in birth. Yes, you will breathe in birth, but if I'm doing the activity of birthing my baby and I'm having a contraction, I'm not breathing the way I am now. And if the contractions get more intense, my breathing has to change because I have to deal with pain or discomfort. If I'm driving in a car on the way to the hospital to have a planned cesarean, I may have planned it and been glad I'm doing it, but I'm going to have anxieties, excitements, feelings, and emotions, and I can best control and contain those emotions by using skills, breathing skills, if nothing else. But it's more important than that for both women who are birthing and women who are going to the hospital to have a non-laboring cesarean, and that is, you are doing the activity of birthing your baby. And you can either do that as a passive person in which birth just happens to you, or you can do it actively. And when you do something actively, you apply skills to it. That's where we as human beings get so empowered. We're empowered by our ability to use one or more skills to do an activity. And sometimes those skills have very discrete elements of it. For instance, if you have to, we don't do this anymore, but if you have to put a thread into a needle, it takes skill to do that. When you put a frying pan on a stove, it takes skill to determine the right heat. We don't think of that as skills, but the fact is, if you say to your 3-year-old, go put a frying pan on a stove, you know that they don't have the skills to do that. So when we think about birthing our babies, we have to think of skills. And what's interesting is that there are a number of skills that aren't linear. So breathing is one of those skills. Relaxation is another skill. Being able to communicate with our partner well is another skill. Being able to stay in the present and not be concerned about the future is another skill. being able to know that our negative thoughts don't have to stop us from using skills to manage and be involved well. So when we think about a skilled birthing population, we think about birth stories that tell us about the skills that people used. And I'll stop there now, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.